All right, then, we go on. Some serious stuff to talk about today. This is the 5th of August. Late in the night, on the 7th of August, a year ago, I arrived at this location. So, it's a year. It's been a hard year. Right now, it's mid-morning. Life at the farm is going on. The weather is as lovely as the weather ever gets in South Dakota. It's kind of a harsh, hostile environment, in my view, in my experience. But anyway, it's a summer day, and the grandchild, age 2, spent the night. And he's been out all over the farm this morning doing chores with his grandma and grandpa. Yeah, so. All right, changing screens, and I'm going to get right at it. I hope. I did not see Islam coming. I really didn't see it coming. I was, watching various things very closely. Department of Homeland Security, Jade Helm slithering across the country. I knew something was coming somewhere, but I didn't see Islam coming. I was preoccupied in another way with my own dire straits, my homelessness, my poverty, my situation that I was in, and I didn't have a passport. By the time I got my passport, and my son confiscated it. He thought I was trying to escape to Mexico. And so I had to reapply, get another passport, and go through a whole 9-yard thing with the State Department about that. And one thing and another, I couldn't go where I wanted to go. And but I was rescued, and so I ended up in South Dakota, thinking that it was just an interim stop. Don't know. Anyway, there was a lot going on, and I guess I'm making excuses for myself, but in whatever case, I did not see Islam coming. I didn't put the pieces of that together until we were reviewing again the artwork on the cover of The Economist magazine. And I came to understand what the Pied Piper symbol on that magazine cover meant. And then I began to see Islam in Europe in a way that I had not seen it before. But in any case, I did not see Islam coming. I think a lot of people have not seen Islam coming. Now I believe that this is the primary and essential issue of our day and time, and time is of the essence. We must come to understand what this is, what is happening. And in light of the seriousness of that, very little else really matters. Chemtrails are not going to matter. GMOs are not going to matter. The ocean dying is not going to matter. None of it is going to matter if we do not deal one way or another with the Islam issue. It's that serious. All right, so today I'm going to be doing this, I think, in 2 parts. It may even end up in 3 parts. I don't know. But I'm going to talk about an essay written by an American warrior class patriot, whose work I have posted, and I have mentioned him, Matt Braken. He's done an essay that is extremely explanatory with regard to Islam. I will be posting all this information on my blog. For right now, I'm just going to do this audio thing about it. The essay is titled Tet Take 2, Islam's 2016 European Offensive. Just to say for the younger people who do not know what Tet means, that's a term that comes from the Vietnam War. Scrolling down here to find this. The Tet Offensive. On January 31st, 1968, some 70,000 North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces launched the Tet Offensive, named for the Lunar New Year holiday called Tet. A coordinated series of first attacks on more than 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam. Though U.S. and South Vietnamese forces managed to hold off the communist attack, news coverage of the offensive, including the lengthy Battle of Hue, shocked and dismayed the American public and further eroded support for the war effort. Despite heavy casualties, North Vietnam achieved a strategic victory with the Tet Offensive, as the attacks marked a turning point in the Vietnam War and the beginning of the slow, painful American withdrawal from the region. No, we're not going to talk about the war in Vietnam, other than I will say that the war in Vietnam in 1968, in that time period, was a huge issue to the American public. Huge issue. And we were all aware, maybe not at the time it was happening, but a little later on when we understood what had happened with the Tet Offensive, it was well known. Nowadays, of course, you know, the younger people have no idea what the hell Tet was. So just to explain that. A coordinated attack on 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam. And of course, it was planned and executed secretly by surprise. There were many, many, many American servicemen in Vietnam at that time. Coordinated series of fierce attacks Got to underline that. On more than 100 cities and towns in South Vietnam. They'll all hit at once. All right. So that explains the title. Something of the title. I have also put on my blog with this piece. It hasn't been published yet, but I'm preparing it. Page 4 of an 82-page PDF of the Islamic State magazine. Oh yeah, Islamic State has an official magazine. This is a PDF, and this document, 82 pages long, is entitled Breaking the Cross, Breaking It. After the attacks in Orlando, USA, Bangladesh, Nice and Normandy, France, Würzburg and Ansbach, Germany, led to the martyrdom of 12 soldiers of the Caliphate and the deaths and injuries of more than 600 crusaders. One would expect the cross worshippers, that's, Christians, and democratic pagans of the West to pause and contemplate the reasons behind the animosity and enmity held by Muslims for Westerners, and even take heed and consider repentance by abandoning their infidelity and accepting Islam. But the fever and delusion caused by, talking about us, sin, superstition, and secularism have numbed what is left of their minds and senses. Their hedonistic attitudes and heathenish doctrines have enslaved them to false gods, including their clergy, their legislatures, and their lusts. As for worshiping the Creator alone and following his final messenger, that would be Muhammad, then that is beyond their consideration. Instead, they wage war against what entails both their welfare in the worldly life and their salvation in the hereafter. They wage war against their Creator, his word, his law, his messenger, and his slaves, and they shamelessly confess their disbelief in his wisdom, mercy, and justice by thinking that the Lord would abandon his religion, Islam, and his slaves, Islamic peoples, to the tyranny of his enemies and their evilness. All right, you guys. Now, whichever viewpoint fits best in your frame of reference. Now, that can be the final primordial conflict between the forces of good and evil as predicted and prophesied for the time of the end. Or it can be looked at as merely the socio-economic conflict of civilizations in terms of globalism versus nationalism. But either way, so getting on to this essay. This was written and published in late November of 2015. by Braken. As we roll into the new year, we are witnessing the prelude to the culmination of a titanic struggle between three great actors. Three great social forces are now set in motion for a 2016 showdown and collision that will, in historic terms, be on par with the First and Second World Wars. Now, we are now in the 8th month of 2016, and this is, in fact, what we are seeing, what we have seen, and what we are experiencing. Two of these great social forces are currently allied in a de facto coalition against the third. They have forged an unwritten agreement to jointly murder of the three forces, while it is in their combined power to do so. One of these two social forces would be content to share totalitarian control over large swaths of the globe with the other remaining special social force. One of these social forces will never be satisfied until it achieves dominion of the entire planet. So what are these three great social forces? They are Islam, international socialism, and nationalism. Allow me to explain the salient aspects of each and how they relate to the coming 2016 cataclysm. So we're going to begin with Islam. Islam is similar to a self-replicating supercomputer virus. It is a hydra-headed monster designed by its creator to be an unstoppable formula for global conquest. It's almost impossible to eradicate because it has no central brain or control center. Islam is like a starfish. When you cut off a limb, another grows to replace it. The names of the Muslim leaders and the names of their Islamic groups are transitory and ultimately unimportant. Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda are succeeded by al-Baghdadi and the Islamic State. But they will all pass from the scene and be replaced by others. While Muslim leaders and regimes have come and gone, Islam itself has remained steadfastly at war with the non-Muslim world for 1400 years. Islam does not recognize secular national boundaries. To devout Muslims, there are only two significant realms of the world. First is the Dar al-Islam. Dar al-Islam. The House of Islam, which is the land of the believers. The other is a Dar al-Harb, the house of war, which must be made Islamic by any means, including violent jihad. The expansion of Islam is sometimes held in check for long periods, but more often Islam is on the march, acquiring new territory. Once conquered by Islam, territory is rarely taken back, Spain being a notable exception. The Muslim world produces almost no books or new inventions. Short of finding oil under their feet, most Islamic nations are backward and impoverished. So wherein lies the power source for Islam's nearly constant expansion over the past 14 centuries? The motor and the battery of Islam are the Quran and the Hadith, or sayings of Muhammad. A messianic Mahdi, caliph, or Ayatollah with sufficient charisma can accelerate Islam's pace of conquest, but the individual men are not the driving force. Secular Muslim in name only strongmen from Saddam Hussein to Muammar Gaddafi can hold Islamism in check for a period with brutal methods. But strong men are often assassinated or otherwise removed from power. And in any event, they cannot live forever. Once the secular strongmen are gone, fanatical mullahs are able to stir their zealous Muslim followers into sufficient ardor to reinstall a radical Islamist regime under Sharia law, according to the Quran. This pattern of secular strongmen being followed by fanatical Islamist leaders has reoccurred many times over the past millennium and longer. Do not be fooled by modernists like King Abdullah of Jordan. To the true believer of Islam, any king or strongman is never more than a rifle shot or a grenade toss away from being kinetically disposed and replaced by another Islamist fanatic. The persistent virulence of Muhammad's 7th century plan for global dominion means that it is always ready to erupt in a fresh outbreak. Islam is like a brush fire or ringworm infection. It is dead and barren within the ring, but flares up when it parasitically feeds off the healthy, non-Islamic societies around it. What produces this uniquely fanatical motivation from within nations and peoples that otherwise seem devoid of energy and new ideas? The motivation lies within the words of the Quran and Hadith. Most simply distilled, in the earthly realm, these Islamic texts offer immoral men sanction for thrill killing, looting, raping, and capturing infidel slaves. And when these jihadists are killed, they are promised a perpetual orgy with 72 nubile virgin slave girls in Muhammad's sick, evil, and perverted Muslim paradise. Unlike the Jewish and Christian Bibles, the Quran and Hadith appeal not to man's better angels, but to the darkest aspects of human nature. Tellingly, Moses and Jesus are said to have climbed to mountaintops to communicate with their God, while Muhammad received his messages from Allah deep inside a bat cave. A meaningful or permanent reformation of Islam is impossible because a new generation of fanatics wielding the unexpurgated Quran and Hadith as their weapons will always declare the reformists to be apostates and murder them. In Islam, the fanatics who are holding the unalterable Quran in one hand and a sword in the other always stands ready to seize complete power and exterminate their enemies. This latent danger breeds fear and causes nearly all non-Muslims to be circumspect in their dealings with Muslims, lest they lose their heads at a later date. This intentionally fostered fear of Islam is used as a cudgel against those who would otherwise resist its domination. The immutable Quran is the constant fountainhead of bloody Islamic conquest. Radical Islam is the pure Islam, the Quranic Islam, the real Islam. There actually is no other Islam. All Islam is radical. Anyone who does not understand this bitter reality is dangerously ignorant of the past 1400 years of human history. Now, by this time in our own studies, we are less dangerously ignorant than we were. We have put up a lot of material. We've worked with a lot of material, and in the last, I will say, 9 months, we have learned more than we could have ever wanted to know about Islam. Unfortunately, that is not true of most of the population of Europe and of the United States, especially the United States. People don't see Islam coming. Okay, going on. Number 2, international socialism. The second great actor or social force is international socialism. It can also be aptly described under the rubrics of leftism, statism, cultural Marxism, and communism. These all inhabit the international socialist spectrum. I trace these cultural Marxists at least back to the Jacobins of the 18th century, a clique of secular humanists who were early globalists aligned with Freemasonry. The nucleus of the group that would later become the Jacobins moved from Germany to France with a coherent and fully developed plan to engineer a social explosion as a means to take power. The Jacobin destabilization plan became the template for many more bloody people's revolutions to come. Following the French Revolution, we are familiar with Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. We're less familiar with the early 20th century British Fabian socialists, or the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci, or the German Frankfurt School of International Socialists, who transplanted their vision to the United States via Columbia University. Unlike Vladimir Lenin and the communists, they understood that international socialism's goals could not be fully accomplished until the strong edifices of Western civilization were hollowed out and sabotaged from within. To the end, the clandestine international socialist forces, which burrowed deep within the Western womb, achieved results which were far more permanent than the militarily imposed revolutionary war communism of Lenin and Mao. Over the course of the past century, while communism collapsed in the Soviet Union, the Fabian socialists have been increasingly successful at poisoning the roots of national, cultural, and ethnic identity, leaving the inheritors of Western civilization disorganized and demoralized, with no central belief system to rally behind. Why has this deliberate demoralization and dumbing down process occurred? The international socialists have believed, at least since the French Revolution, that it was their duty to impose a top-down feudal order upon the ordinary dumb masses, a new world order managed by self-proclaimed experts chosen from among the correctly educated elites, both for the benefit of the ignoramuses and as a way to line their own pockets and continue to live an elite lifestyle of wealth and power. It may seem paradoxical that major corporate and banking interests are deeply invested in the international socialist New World Order, but when you untangle the threads, it actually makes perfect sense. Today's international banks and mega corporations are powerful global actors in their own right, and they are now written into each new international trade agreement. In fact, corporate lawyers author most of the pages of the multi-thousand-page trade pacts, which are now coming down like rain. Trade pacts, which were never voted on by American or European citizens, pacts which are taking on the force of international treaty law, superseding even the United States Constitution. This would be, for example, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Going on. From the Rothschilds of Europe to the Warburgs of both continents, to the Morgans and Rockefellers of America, and back to the Hungarian immigrant George Soros, for several centuries, millionaires and more lately billionaire bankers have written their own laws and cut their own political deals. Today, they literally create billions of new dollars and euros per day out of thin air and pass it over to their cronies. In the United States, the creation a century ago of the Federal Reserve, privately run central bank of, by, and for the interests of a cabal of private banking interests, is a glaring case in point. In the USA, the heads of global mega corporations and investment firms donate massively to both the Democrats and the Republicans alike, ensuring favorable treatment in an era of corporately directed crony capitalism. This picture is much the same in other countries. These post-nationalist crony capitalists recognize no sovereign borders and believe that patriotism is a laughable anarchism. For example, in America, open borders traders bribe politicians to pass laws to allow them to import unlimited numbers of H-1 visa foreign workers to directly replace Americans at their very desks and workplaces. And these traders do not lose one wink of sleep over it. The trader class of the international business set calls this agility. Moving fungible proles, peasants, and paupers worldwide to where they can be set to work most cheaply and profitably. Ordinary American middle-class workers and their families are just collateral damage in this process. This reality is not much different in Europe. These super wealthy open border corporate and banking elites, who paradoxically steer the forces driving international socialism, are able to bribe their way to success after success in myriad ways. Their wealth and political connections ensure that cooperative young players with future star quality are steered to the right universities, foundations, councils, government agencies, and media positions. For example, when you see a talking head on television and his listed expert credential is that he is a member of the entirely private Council on Foreign Relations, who has written articles for their house publication, Foreign Affairs, you will know that he is destined for high positions and doors will magically open in front of him. Over on the Fourth Estate, the global mass media have been almost entirely subverted, scripted, managed for decades by these uber wealthy elites through 1,000 channels greased with kickbacks, no-show jobs, and secret payoffs that are disguised as special stock offerings and private land deals. Media figures morph seamlessly into senior political advisors and corporate board members, adding millions to their portfolios with each well-timed transition. Even many retired generals and admirals eagerly wallow in this swamp of sellout and sleaze. It should not be a surprise to anyone that so many politicians leave Washington or Brussels as millionaires. Just as it should not be a surprise that longtime CBS news anchor Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, was for his entire adult life secretly a leading member of the World Federalist Association, a fact he proudly revealed only after his retirement from in front of the camera. Number 3, nationalism. Nationalists probably comprise most of the population of the non-Islamic world, but there is no way to know their number with any certainty. Opinion polls are so easily rigged that most of them are useless at best, and they primarily constitute false propaganda and disinformation on behalf of their sponsors. Nationalists consider themselves to be first and foremost loyal citizens of a sovereign nation. However, it must be borne in mind that the very concept of nationhood is fairly recent in origin. The division of the globe into distinct nation states only began in the 17th century, usually marked by the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 at the end of the 30 Years' War. Since then, the world has been divided by national borders, which often but not always coincided with a national ethnic group, language, and culture. This national division was particularly successful on the European continent. Shared Judeo-Christian morality, ethics, and values promoted notions of fairness and equal rights, leading over time to the abolition of slavery, women's rights, and racial civil rights. During this period of unleashed human potential, Europeans and Americans enjoyed the greatest increase in overall standards of living ever seen in the history of mankind. Great cities, universities, museums were constructed in Europe and in America. Rising European empires, wealthy, cohesive, confident, and highly organized, then conquered or otherwise, came to control colonies around the world. America picked up much of the business when the colonial era ended after World War II. Happy national outcomes were far from universal. During the 20th century, communism rose to take complete power in some countries, notably Russia as the Soviet Union and China. But their successes did not lead to an unstoppable avalanche of global revolution, as had been foreseen by Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. On the other hand, the slow, grinding, long march through the institutions of the trader class Fabian socialist, including Gramsci, the Frankfurt School, and others, proved far more effective and durable. By the 21st century, these cultural Marxist trader molds had subverted nearly all of academia, inculcating generation after generation of students with a contempt bordering on hatred for their own national and ethnic identities. Most of the media were also subverted, ensuring that mass communications would always reinforce the politically correct international socialist worldview that had already been injected and incubated in the schools and universities. In this era of mass brainwashing by the cultural Marxists, Christianity was recast as a retrograde, back social force, obsolete at best in the modern secular world, and at worst an outright danger to humanity. In the new politically correct secular religion of humanism, European ethnic and cultural identity became the original sin in the mark of Cain. White European skin meant white privilege and was transformed into a cause for shame. Meanwhile, emancipated European and American women aimed toward new goals, which increasingly did not include producing a new generation, and demographic collapse began. Both men and women alike were anesthetized into apathy with 24-hour entertainment transmitted by high-def screens and stereo earbuds planted nearly into their brains. This unceasing fountain of entertainment proved an ideal conduit for mass brainwashing with politically correct values and ideas. Thus distracted and demoralized, most Americans and Europeans today seem unable and unwilling to stand up and fight in defense of their diminishing cultural and national identities. Brainwashed social justice warriors, the latest iteration of Lenin's useful idiots, hastened the demise of Western civilization, blissfully unaware of what will follow. Thus rendered supine, The remaining American and European nationalists constitute the weakest and the most threatened of the three major global social forces. In a few European nations, patriots such as uh, uh, Geert Wilders of the Netherlands, and again, I'm botching these names, forgive me. I've not heard them pronounced by anyone else, and I don't know how. Anyway, someone of Germany, Viktor Orban of Hungary, Nigel Farage of the UK, and Marine Le Pen of France lead a rearguard defense of their national, ethnic, and cultural identities while constantly being disparaged in the socialist-controlled liar press as racists, Nazis, and xenophobes. All right. I don't know how long I've talked, probably enough. I'm going to conclude this as part one, talking about, this is the essay which has had great impact. This is why it's important. This essay has had great impact upon the Christian warrior class, the patriots, the guys who have the guns and know how and intend to use them. I offer this as some comfort, this fact as some comfort to the people around the world who may think that there's no one in the United States fit or able to do something about the Islamic takeover. I just want you to know that American patriots of the strongest arms are knowledgeable and fully aware of what the hell is going on here. Okay, I'm going to bow out of this one, and I will continue and do a part two, and if necessary, a part three, because we have to cover and understand this information. Okay, changing screens. Okay, talk to you in a little while. Later, Gator.